Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to another edition of Crimes of the Week International. Authorities in the Australian state of New South Wales say that a 42-year-old man is facing murder charges this week after he was accused of deliberately setting a fire at his mother's home that killed her and injured at least one other person. The incident began at around 1:30 p.m. on January 7th when emergency responders received a call about a large fire at a property in the community of Bribbaree. Firefighters arrived to find the home of 65-year-old Int'l Doble completely engulfed in flames. At the same time, paramedics discovered neighbors desperately tending to the 65-year-old. She had been badly wounded in the blaze, and they had placed her in an outdoor bath full of ice, hoping to save her life. Though Int'l was flown to Royal North Shore Hospital, sadly, her injuries were too severe. She had suffered burns to 90% of her body and died early the next morning around 3 a.m. A teenage girl who was also present at the scene was reportedly treated for burns to her legs, though is expected to survive. In the aftermath of the deadly fire, investigators zeroed in on Int'l's 42-year-old son, Shannon Doble. They now allege that Doble deliberately set the fire that killed his mother, and he was arrested after turning himself in at a police station roughly 90 miles from the crime scene. He is now facing a number of charges, including domestic violence murder, causing wounding/grievous bodily harm to a person with intent to murder, damage to property by fire/explosion greater than $15,000, and assault occasioning actual bodily harm. At the time of this recording, little additional information is available about the case. No motive has been released, though it's said that Doble had been living in a converted bus on his mother's property prior to the crime. He was supposed to be helping her with renovations on the now-destroyed house, which she reportedly purchased just a year ago as part of her plans to retire. According to her family, the 65-year-old was a beloved mother and grandmother to 5 children and 11 grandchildren. Currently, Shannon Doble remains in custody without bail. Representatives from London's Metropolitan Police are requesting help from the public this week as they seek to identify the suspect behind a violent recent attack that began with an argument over dog poop. According to reports, the incident took place in the early morning hours of December 16, 2023, when the unknown suspect was walking his dog near the intersection of Ropemaker Street and Moorgate. After stopping to let his pet do their business, he apparently attempted to walk away without cleaning it up, at which point he was confronted by the unidentified victim. An argument began, one which quickly escalated when the suspect stabbed the other man and ran off. Thankfully, the victim's injuries were not life-threatening. Police have now released images of the suspect taken from nearby CCTV footage and are asking for anyone who might recognize the man or who might have any other information about the crime to please come forward. The family members and friends of an Olympic runner are mourning his tragic death this week, days after he was murdered during the middle of an alleged robbery. According to reports, the body of 34-year-old Benjamin Kipgalit was found in the early morning hours of December 31st, 2023, inside of his brother's car. The vehicle was discovered close to a high school on the outskirts of the city of Eldoret. The Ugandan athlete had suffered a fatal knife wound to his throat. Thanks to CCTV footage in the area, police say that they were able to track down and arrest 2 men who they say were responsible for the crime. They have since been identified as David Lockyer and Peter Kalumi, who are now being held on murder charges. The men were allegedly in possession of the weapon used to kill Benjamin at the time of their arrests, and it's believed that their motive was robbery since Benjamin's cell phone and some of his money were found to be missing from the crime scene. Though Benjamin was originally from Uganda, at the time of his murder he was in Kenya as part of his training. The 34-year-old reportedly competed in 3 Olympic Games and 6 World Championships, specializing in the 3,000-meter steeplechase. Authorities say they do not believe that Benjamin was targeted by his killers, but rather that the attack happened at random. The situation is still under investigation. Authorities in the Indian state of Gujarat say that a pair of cyber-stalking suspects may or may not be facing legal consequences this week after they orchestrated a months-long campaign of blackmail and humiliation against their former boss as revenge for his allegedly poor treatment of them at work. The whole thing started sometime this past fall when the suspects, identified only by the aliases Preeti and Anish, quit their jobs at a software company in the city of Vadodara. They allegedly did this because they could no longer handle working for their boss, identified only by the pseudonym Samir Gupta, who they claim had a habit of ridiculing them and constantly berating them at the office. According to reports, simply quitting wasn't enough for Preeti and Anish, though. In order to get even, they decided that they wanted to make Samir miserable. The pair started by creating an Instagram profile for a fake woman, which they then used to contact Samir. They spent weeks chatting him up, during which time they began to send explicit messages and photos. Once they had earned his trust, they asked for him to send similar photos in return, to which he happily obliged. Samir didn't realize he had fallen into a trap until a few days later, when Preeti and Anish began sending him his own photos back, along with screenshots of their conversations on Instagram. At first, they sent these to his personal email, but before long, they reportedly sent them to his official company email, as well as to the company's HR department. They didn't stop there, though. Over the next couple of months, they sent the explicit photos to Samir's wife, and even printed them out and mailed them to her office. Samir finally went to the police in December after things escalated once again. By this point, Preeti and Anish were allegedly sending him photos of himself in various public places, demonstrating that they were stalking him. According to investigators, though Samir had no idea who was behind the harassment, it took them just 10 days to figure out what was going on. They have since reached out to the suspects, informing them of possible legal consequences, though apparently the pair might get away with it. Samir has reportedly been hesitant to pursue the case further, meaning that it's unclear if authorities will be able to move ahead with charges. Officials in South Korea say that a man is facing attempted murder charges this week, following a disturbing stabbing attack against one of the country's most prominent political leaders. The whole thing began on the morning of January 2nd, when the victim, Lee Chae-myung, was at a construction site for a new airport in the port city of Busan. Lee, who is the head of South Korea's main opposition party, the Democratic Party of Korea, was visiting the area as part of a series of campaign events ahead of the country's upcoming general elections. At approximately 10:37 a.m., after the scheduled tour was over, Lee stopped momentarily to greet a crowd of constituents. He agreed to give an autograph to a man posing as a supporter, only for the man to pull out a 7-inch-long camping knife and stab him in the neck. Though the attacker was quickly overpowered and detained, the attack left Lee with a potentially life-threatening wound. He was rushed to a nearby hospital where he underwent a multi-hour surgery to repair a major vein in his neck. He survived, with local sources now stating that he is recovering well. Following a court decision, officials decided not to release the attacker's full name. However, they have identified him as a 67-year-old real estate agent from the city of Asan by the last name of Kim. A second suspect, a man in his 70s, was briefly detained after the incident, though he has since been released. Authorities claim that this man knew about the planned attack ahead of time, but believe his only direct involvement was agreeing to send an 8-page letter that Kim had written explaining his actions. The full contents of that letter have not been released, though police say that in it, Kim attempted to justify the attack against Lee, citing a number of political and economic grievances. It appears that his anger wasn't only directed at the DPK leader, however, as he reportedly named and threatened other politicians as well, writing that the country's economy would collapse no matter who wins the April general elections. Disturbingly, it appears that Kim may have been following Lee for several months leading up to the attack. According to police, he can be seen in footage of another event in December where he attempts to get close to the politician but isn't able to make it through the crowd. At the time of this recording, Kim remains in custody on attempted murder charges. Authorities say that the situation is still under investigation. Authorities in the Brazilian state of Sao Paulo say that they are investigating the mysterious death of a YouTuber and online influencer this week, following the discovery of his body under suspicious circumstances at the home of one of his friends and neighbors. The whole thing started on Christmas Eve when 26-year-old Carlos Henrique Medeiros went to visit some friends in the municipality of Itapecerica de Serra. The 26-year-old, who had nearly 1.8 million followers on YouTube and was known for his prank and challenge videos, sent messages to his family members wishing them a Merry Christmas that evening. However, those communications abruptly stopped in the early morning hours of the following day. When no one could get a hold of Carlos, the first people that his family went to were the friends that he was visiting, 28-year-old Renan Jose and 24-year-old Caroline Mello. However, the couple claimed that they hadn't seen Carlos since he left their house sometime between 1 and 2 a.m. that morning. With that, a search was launched for Carlos, with family, friends, and volunteers scattering out to see if they could find any sign of him in the local area. According to reports, the search effort came to a tragic end on December 30th, when a friend of Carlos's noticed something in the garden of the same house where he had last been seen. It looked like the ground had been recently disturbed, and when the man got closer, to his horror, he thought he recognized some of Carlos's clothing below a mound of dirt. Authorities were called, who quickly confirmed the chilling find. The 26-year-old's body had been buried in the garden. Understandably, police turned their attention back to Renan and Caroline, who now told a completely different story. They claimed that Carlos had died after overdosing on cocaine while having sex with Caroline's sister. The couple stated that the 26-year-old had simply dropped dead during the drug-fueled hookup, after which they panicked and tried to get rid of his body because they didn't know what else to do. At the time of this recording, police say that they haven't been able to confirm or disprove the couple's story, though based on preliminary examinations, there didn't seem to be any obvious signs of trauma to Carlos's body. They say that they won't know for sure what happened until a detailed autopsy has taken place, but at the very least, Renan and Caroline will likely be charged for concealing a corpse. Carlos's family members, meanwhile, say that they don't believe the couple's story, and instead think that this was a murder. In particular, they question why Caroline and Renan would have covered anything up if it was just an accident. Currently, the situation is still under investigation. Authorities in the Thai province of Sakon Nakhon say that a 35-year-old man is facing murder charges this week after he was accused of plotting and carrying out the disturbing drowning deaths of his father and sister. According to reports, the case began at around 12:40 a.m. on January 9th when police were called to Nong Lum Hin Pond in the district of Phang. Locals said that they had heard arguing in the area a couple of hours earlier before finding two large and suspicious metal boxes submerged in the water. When officers arrived at the scene, they found the two metal containers just as callers had described. They were both wrapped with thick chains that had been secured with locks. Police fished the containers out of the pond, only to realize to their horror that each of them contained a body. The victims were quickly identified as father and daughter, 68-year-old Prayat and 33-year-old Phang Datapumi. After conducting further interviews, authorities learned that witnesses had seen an SUV parked near the pond around the time that the metal containers had been dumped. The vehicle was traced back to one of the victims' family members, 35-year-old Warut Datapumi. According to reports, Warut was Phang's brother and Prayat's son. During an interview, Warut allegedly confessed to killing his sister and father. Chillingly, he stated that it was all part of an elaborate plan he had come up with because he was angry at them for always criticizing his behavior. Warut explained that prior to the killings, he had the metal boxes custom made by a local factory, telling them that he planned to use them for a YouTube video idea he had. On the night of the murders, he asked his dad and sister to drive out to the pond with him, where he showed them what he had made. He claimed that they were prototypes of a new bed that he had designed and convinced them to climb inside. Once they did, he locked them in and pushed the containers into the pond. Both boxes had holes in them to let water in, and disturbingly, autopsies confirmed that both victims had been alive when they went into the pond. At the time of this recording, Warut remains in police custody on murder charges. Authorities say that if convicted, he could be looking at the death penalty. Authorities in Ecuador are desperately trying to maintain order this week, following the escape of one of the country's most dangerous gang leaders, an event that has led to days of chaos and violence in major cities across the nation, including one particularly terrifying incident at a well-known television station. The whole thing began on the morning of January 7th, when officials at a prison in the large port city of Guayaquil discovered that one of their most high-profile inmates, Jose Adolfo Macias Villamar, was missing. The 44-year-old, who is better known by the name Fito, is the leader of the notorious criminal organization known as Los Choneros. The gang has links to Mexico's Sinaloa cartel and is involved in drug trafficking and extortion. In fact, if you're a regular viewer of our Crimes of the Week International series, then you might recognize the gang's name, as we have spoken about Los Choneros several times, particularly in reference to the numerous deadly prison riots that have taken place in Ecuador over the last couple of years, in which they have usually played a significant role. Anyway, at the time Fito was found to be missing this week, he was scheduled to be moved to a different, more secure part of the prison. It's now alleged that at least 2 prison guards helped the drug lord to escape just a few hours before the transfer could take place. In response to the incident, Ecuador's recently elected president, Daniel Noboa, declared a 60-day nationwide state of emergency. No sooner had that order taken effect than the country was plunged into complete chaos. According to reports, since Fito's escape, at least 30 attacks have taken place, mostly in major cities. These include the kidnapping and killing of police officers and prison guards, bombings and arsons, as well as other crimes meant to terrify the public. It appears that there have also been further high-profile prison breaks, including one on January 9th, where the leader of another drug gang, Fabricio Colon Pico, managed to get away. Pico was recently arrested for his alleged involvement in a plot to assassinate the country's attorney general. The most highly publicized incident to occur so far, though, happened on January 9th when gang members stormed the studios of a well-known television station. The attack took place at around 2:30 p.m. when masked and armed men entered the studios of the TC television network and began shouting and pointing guns in the faces of employees. At the time, the station was live on air. After being held hostage, employees were ordered to get down on the ground. For several minutes, the victims could be heard pleading with the attackers, who fired shots and continued to threaten them. The feed was eventually cut, though according to some reports, the channel still continued to broadcast internationally. The chaotic situation lasted for roughly half an hour, until police fully surrounded the building. Eventually, all 13 of the gang members were apparently arrested, and thankfully, it appears that no one was seriously hurt or killed. Following this incident, President Noboa signed a further executive order declaring an internal armed conflict in the country. The order also officially named several of the gangs involved in the violence as terror organizations and non-state actors. While police and the military have begun to crack down heavily on the drug gangs in the past few days, it appears that the government is struggling to fully restore order. It's also unclear whether authorities are any closer to recapturing Fito or the other escaped prisoners. At the time of this recording, the situation is still developing. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.